everyone, welcome to the next session of the Memory Box Reading Group online. The theme we're going to look at is fairs. The first extract I'd like to read is about the mop fairs, and that was by somebody, they only gave their initials, EGHK, with no date, but it seemed to be, I think, probably around the 1950s to 1970s this was written. So I'll start. Commonly, fairs took place on the feast day of the patron saint of the parish church. It was St Mary's parish where it was custom, and this was confirmed by the Borough Charter of 1204, which established a fair to last 8 days, starting from the eve of the Feast of the Assumption of the Blessed Virgin Mary, which was on August the 15th. It was to be conducted in good order and peacefully, with the same advantages as applied at Winchester and Oxford. Traders were attracted from far and wide. It relates to Marlborough, in case you were wondering. As the town began to spread eastwards into the land, which at that time was in the Preshute parish, a fair was established on the new land in 1229. It was a fair of 4 days, starting on the eve of the Feast of St Martin, November the 11th, and the district soon became known as St Martin's. A famous controversy occurred here in 1252. Not unnaturally, the populace preferred to attend the much nearer church of St Mary's, rather than go right through the town to Preshute. But the rector of Preshute objected, and with the bishop's backing upheld his rights. Not to be outdone, the inhabitants got together within the next 2 years and built themselves a chapel of St Martin's, at the lower end of Cold Harbour Lane. It was only in 1552, in a period of ecclesiastical reorganisation, that this part of the town was transferred to the parish of St Mary's, and the chapel was pulled down. At that time, the fair was held on the green, but in 1791 it was moved to a more commodious spot in the parish on the common. And you can imagine in those days, I would think, yeah, they're quite right. If they're really busy, they don't want to be spending all their time walking miles to the parish church when they have another local one right in front of them. I've come across this sometimes as well, helping researchers with their family research. There was one where they knew the inhabitants were living in a certain parish, but they couldn't find their baptism. And when I looked, I found it in the parish just below. So actually what was happening is they were actually probably in the lower part of that parish and decided it was much easier and quicker to go to their neighbouring parish to visit their church and do the baptism there rather than the church in their own parish. So it does sound quite common and quite common sense too. In 1246, the other Marlborough parish was given its fair, to be held on the 4 days starting on the eve of the Feast of St Peter and St Paul, which was June 29th. It was held outside the churchyard and below it, straddling what is now part of the Pewsey Road on the north side of the River Kennet. The track was really awkward for horse traffic, and so a move was made in 1789. But this road improvement crossed the site of the fair, which was mainly used for the sale of horses, and the fair was forthwith discontinued. As the importance of these fairs died down, so there grew up a custom of hiring fairs at a certain fixed time of the year, Whitsun, Michaelmas or Martinmas. Often a farm labourer would advertise his interest by putting an ear or two of corn into his hat. A maidservant would carry a mop, and so the term mop fair came into use. The first known reference to a mop fair was made in 1677 at Banbury, but the term was soon used in many parts of southwest England. In Marlborough, the first such reference occurs in the Borough Chamberlain's accounts of 1831. By custom, there are 2 fairs. One, the Little Mop, on the Saturday before Michaelmas, which is October the 10th, and the other, the Great Mop, on the Saturday following that day. This double opportunity enabled unsatisfied masters or men to review the situation after a week's trial. In the first half of the 19th century, there were frequent attempts to abolish these fairs. A sermon was preached in Marlborough in 1833 against the custom, on the grounds of their encouraging undesirable behaviour. Wootton Bassett abolished its hiring fair in 1837. In 1873, Marlborough Borough debated their suitability, in what they were attended with much immorality and considerable inconvenience and possible danger of the introduction of infectious diseases. Scarlet fever and smallpox had both visited the town during the past 10 years. No steps were taken, and when fresh suggestions were made in 1887, loss of trade was deplored. Nowadays, their desirability depends more on the public attitude to noise and dislocation of road transport. Generally, those who live in the high street and the other main traffic lanes, as well as the police, favour their abolition, whereas the rest favour their retention as an old established custom. In any case, for long now, the fairs have been totally transformed into fun fairs. And now I move on to an extract by Richard Jefferies from his book Amaryllis at the Fair, which was first published in 1887, but the History Centre's copy was published in 1992. Here were 2,000 or 3,000 people packed in the street, and all they had to enliven their festive gathering was the same old toys their fathers' had set before them. Rows of booths for the display of fairings. Gingerbread nuts, cakes, brandy balls, sugar plums stood in the gutter each side. The fairings were sweet biscuits. They had been made every fair this 100 years. The nuts were dry and hard, just as Spanish nuts always are. The gingerbread was moulded in the same old shapes of clumsy horses outlined with gilt. There was the same old trumpeting and tootling, tom-tomming, and the roaring of showmen's voices. The same old roundabouts, only now they were driven by steam, and short quick whistles announced the world that the whirligig caravan was travelling the world. The fat woman, the strong man, the smashers tapping the claret, the pelican of the wilderness, that mystic and melancholy bird, the rifle galleries, the popping for nuts. Behold, these are our fathers as our fathers had seen. At Woolhorton, nobody but the very rawest and crudest folk cared for the shows. All they did care was to alternately stand stock still and then shove. First they moved as far as the Lion and had some beer, then they stood stock still in the street and blocked those who were shoeing. Several thousand people were this happily occupied, and the Lion and Lamb laid down together peacefully that day. Gosh, it sounds like it's more people having an excuse to go to the pub than actually enjoying the fair itself. Amaryllis and old Iden had in like manner to shove, for there was no other way to get through. Not one thought of moving or giving any passage. If you wanted to progress, you must shoulder them aside. As Grandfather Iden could not shove very hard, they were frequently compelled to wait till groups opened. Iden turned down a passage near the end of the street. They were no longer incommoded by a crowd, but now and then folk came by, hastening to the fair, lads with favours in their coats and blue ribbons in their hats, girls in bright dresses, chiefly crude colours, who seemed out of accord with the heavy weight, as if they were of the great abbey, the ponderous walls, the quiet gloom of the narrow space, and the shadows that lurked behind the buttresses. Goodness, it sounds like a very, very crowded place, the fair. Great. I will move on to the next set of extracts, so please join me in a second.